everyone, here we are again. It's Alexandra, and I'm here with Dotsie for another great show. But before we start with the interview, I just want to check in with you all to see how you're feeling about your health and your daily routine. You're listening to this podcast, so I figure you care about that kind of thing. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be perfect, and I'm here to encourage you not to do that. Part of being healthy and happy is to not even think about perfection. Perfection's baloney. I learned that the hard way. So anyway, if you're feeling guilty or bad about not being the person you thought you'd be after all this time you've been spending trying to look better, feel better, learn tips and tricks on how to hack, whatever, I am talking to you. What I learned in my years as a health coach and as someone who thought I had to be perfect, and I really felt I was a bad person if I wasn't executing my days perfectly when it came to health habits, is that the way to get good habits and keep them is to focus on just one habit, a habit that's not too challenging and that you can repeat consistently until it's so much a part of your routine that you can't imagine a day without it. And when I say not too challenging, I mean something you don't dread, doesn't make you feel deprived, and it can't take up too much time or effort. So it's like if you want to eat more healthily, you add 1 cup of greens to 1 meal a day. You don't try and all of a sudden become the healthiest eater ever. If you want to stop drinking soda, you just cut out half a can a day or every other day if every day is too much, and substitute it with something else that's like bubbly and fun. And the point is just to make some kind of a change. As my sister Caroline says, if you don't change something, nothing's going to change. This just helps you get unstuck. And the change really can be tiny. The most important thing is that it's consistent and intentional. And then once it gets so you're saying, I think I'd just like to push a tiny bit more with this good habit because it's feeling fine, it's feeling easy. You can just expand the good habit a little. If you want to work out more, but you never seem to do it because it seems exhausting or too much of a hassle, or you feel like you don't have the time, start with something really small, like 5 minutes every day. I mean, some of us go, oh, well, 5 minutes, that doesn't even count. It's so short. But just do calisthenics during the commercials of your favorite TV show. Or, I stretch listening to podcasts, and that's why I look forward to stretching, and I do it consistently. So you start off doing something that doesn't take up a lot of time and upend your life, and something that you kind of you look forward to because you've paired it with something that you enjoy. That's called habit pairing, and it really works. So if you can get into that habit of 5 minutes, you just slowly expand the time you spend exercising, for example, until maybe you're someone who works out 20 minutes a day. And it might take a year or two, but who cares? In 2 years, you'll be someone with an exercise routine. If you don't start that, in 2 years, you'll be someone without an exercise routine. And these are called keystone habits, which means that when you do something healthy regularly and feel good about it, it can make doing other healthy things easier. And there's sort of this cascade of other daily habits that you start doing because you feel really good from the first one. So think of one very small thing that is easy to incorporate and which you know is a positive move in your life, and just start doing it. If you don't succeed in doing this very, very small change, then you might not have planned it well enough. So make sure you have that sparkling water in your fridge, or green vegetables around, or your workout shoes and good podcasts all ready to go. It might also mean, if you find that you don't succeed at even the smallest of changes, is that you're not clear in exactly what you're doing. So be sure to write down a sentence even that says exactly, okay, what you're doing. I'm going to jog. For how long? For 10 minutes. When? After work, as soon as I get home, every other day. Okay, so there you go. That is a very clear habit change. And once you get really clear on what you're going to do and commit to it in your head, it makes it easier. So when I committed to drinking more water, I decided that I would just drink the water from my green bottle every workout. And wasn't very hard. And now I do it without even thinking. And now I drink water throughout the day, even because I've just incorporated water into my life slowly. This did not happen all at once. So I hope what I've said is helpful, and feel free to share with us how it goes by emailing us at info@switchforgood.org, or go to switchforgood.org/podcast, and you can scroll down to this orange record button and send us a voice message. We always love to hear from you. And thank you for being a listener of Switch for Good. Let's get on with the show.
There are like three very basic, fundamental sort of drivers of constipation. The first is movement. To move your gut, you got to move. The second is water. You need to drink adequate water to help things move. And the third is dietary fiber.
If you've ever wondered how to make nutritious food taste amazing, or what foods boost your health by supporting your gut microbiome, then you're going to love today's episode. Our guest is Desiree Nielsen. Desiree is a plant-based recipe developer, podcaster, author, and a registered dietitian with a focus on plant-based nutrition and gut health. In her new book, Plant Magic, a celebration of plant-based cooking for everyone, Desiree has created a beautiful cookbook with so many creative recipes to make eating plants easy, convenient, and delicious. You might remember Desiree from her appearance in our episode 185, where we learned all about the gut and brain connection. We talked about keeping inflammatory responses healthy, and we discussed the truth about getting enough protein through plants. But there was so much ground we didn't get to cover, so we're very excited to welcome her back to the show. Welcome, Desiree, to Switch for Good podcast, part 2.
I am so excited to be back here with you both this time, which is really exciting.
Yeah, Dotsie she was traveling last time, so she wasn't able to be on the show, but today we're all here. So Desiree, let's start with talking about gut health, and then we'll talk more about your cookbook. You yourself suffered from digestive issues, and we covered a lot of those on episode 185 because you had written a cookbook called Good for Your Gut.
Yeah.
But let's talk a little bit more about it, because everyone is so interested in this issue. So if someone is suffering from either gas pains, bloating, slow digestion, what are usually the most common culprits?
You know, one of the things that I find really interesting as a dietitian is that as soon as anything happens to our gut, particularly because we put our food in there, and so our symptoms typically coincide with, oh, I ate a meal and all of a sudden I feel so bloated, or I feel really gassy, we immediately blame the food. That's our first thought with digestive health. And so much of the information that we receive online, talks about, oh, well, if you're gassy, that means you must be inflamed. And so you have to remove X, Y, and Z. There are a lot of different causes of bloating and gas and otherwise digestive troubles that actually have nothing to do with food. And I think this is a really important starting place before we get into sort of the nitty-gritty of nutrition. The first is, particularly for all of us who sit all day, maybe we're still working from home, tight waistbands and sitting a lot can be a huge cause of bloating. And the reason for that is that our body is meant to have free movement, and gravity really does impact the way that our gut moves. I say that for your gut to move, you need to move. So when we're sitting at home with our abdomens compressed, particularly if we're wearing really tight waistbands, that can impede the normal digestive flow. And that can be a really simple cause of bloating that people greatly underestimate. Other things that can happen is when people eat too quickly. So yes, it's about eating, but it's not about what we're eating, but how. When we eat really quickly, if we are a big gum chewer, if we love, and I love my fizzy drinks, oh my gosh, do I love them? But if we drink a lot of fizzy drinks, we're consuming gas, we're swallowing air. And that gas can lead to a lot of indigestion and bloating as well, because that gas has got to go somewhere.
What could it be in terms of food? What do you see most often?
So, the first thing I'll do with people is ask them, let's talk about how you eat. So are you chewing your food thoroughly? Or do you eat really fast and therefore you're not really chewing, which leaves a lot of partially digested food in the gut? Are you talking while our moms always said, like, never talk with your mouth full, doing all these. Once we've sort of like gotten what I call the eating hygiene piece out of the way, then we start to look a little bit deeper. And so one of the things that I always do in our practice is we ask people for a food and symptom record. So we ask people for like about a week's time to record everything they eat and drink, as well as their symptoms. And it's not always glaringly obvious, but what I can see sometimes, a great example with bloating, is that people may skip meals, or they may be really erratic with their meals. Their meal times are all over the place. Maybe they do shift work. That could be a common cause. Or someone might come to me because they're new to a plant-based diet. And I look at their dietary pattern and I see so many high fiber foods, so much fiber, which, as we're introducing fibers into our diet, it's really critical that we give our body time to adapt and to process. So if someone was like, I watched a documentary and I was so inspired, and I immediately went out, bought a bunch of cookbooks and got like all of the legumes, all of the whole grains, and their diet looks like lentils and spelt and sprouted green bread and chia seeds. I'll be like, this is one time the dietitian is going to tell you just to pull it back a little bit. So we really need to make sure, if we're very excited about gut health or about eating more whole plant foods, that we go very slowly in consistency, that we add 1 to 2 higher fiber plant foods a week, ensure we're drinking lots of water, ensure we're getting plenty of movement, and allow our gut to adjust over time. So too much fiber too soon can be a really big culprit. Yeah. Then, of course, in digestive health, because I have irritable bowel syndrome and so many of our clients do, I'm looking for really high FODMAP foods, which seems like it goes with fiber, but it's different. FODMAPs are fermentable oligo, di, and monosaccharides and polyols. The reason why we call them FODMAPs is because that's a huge mouthful. But what they are fermentable carbohydrates. So they're carbohydrates found in all plant foods. The only place you won't find FODMAPs are in pure proteins or pure oil. So extra virgin olive oil has no FODMAPs, for example. Everything else with a carbohydrate is potentially a high FODMAP food. And these are carbohydrates that resist digestion. So they're not simple for us and our enzymes and our stomach acid, all those kind of things to break down. So instead of us digesting and absorbing it into our system, it remains in the digestive tract, and it moves through the digestive tract where it can interact with the gut tissues and it can interact with the gut microbiome. And so once you've got these resistant carbohydrates in the microbiome, they ferment them. If you have a really gas-producing bacteria in your system, that can cause lots of gas, lots of bloating. And it's a core component of the symptom spectrum in irritable bowel syndrome. And considering that, perhaps 10% of us have IBS, whether or not we know it, carbohydrate and specifically FODMAP intolerance in things like legumes, in things like whole grains, in even certain fruits such as mango and cherries, can be contributing to these symptoms as well.
My mom has IBS. Hi, Mom. We're going to help people, so she's going to be okay to share this. And two things. One is I want to understand the role and connection between intense stress. She works under stress, but she's got a lot of it. She's like literally kind of like this sometimes. It's so intense. And how that intensive stress, or maybe really any stress, but this is definitely chronic stress, affects the gut. And then I wanted to go into her eating more fermented foods than like, kimchi and, things that are fermented, carrots that are fermented or whatever it might be. She has a terrible time with legumes, as you were just describing at the end of this. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's start with stress, because as I mentioned off the top, so many of these core drivers of intestinal symptoms have nothing to do with foods themselves. And stress is a massive player. Like in the last episode, we talked about the brain-gut connection. And we know that stress can impact your symptoms in multiple ways. From the very simple, which is when we're stressed, We tend to eat really quickly. We don't chew properly. That can really augment digestion for the worse. But also, when we are stressed, we are in our sympathetic nervous system. So if we go back to our high school biology class, we learned about our fight or flight nervous system and our rest and digest. That's not just a clever nickname. So when we're in our sympathetic nervous system, by design, the energy and blood flow in our bodies is shuttled away from non-essential activities to our brain, to our limbs. So we can think fast, when we can fight, or we can flee. If we're chronically stressed, that nervous system is activated more often. And by definition, we are not in the appropriate sort of nervous system response, the parasympathetic, for optimal digestion, our rest and digest nervous system. The other ways that stress can really impact symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome is that we know that stress enhances perception of pain. And this is really important because there is a lot of sort of misconceptions about IBS, a great example being that people with IBS make more intestinal gas and they are, more distended because of that. But there is some research that pokes holes in that theory. In particular, it would appear that the nervous system within the gut, so the enteric nervous system, rewires somewhat in a subset of people with irritable bowel syndrome, so that as the gut sort of expands, which is normal when you put food through it, like it's going to expand to receive the food and let that food move through, but the normal stretch receptor response is altered so that a little bit of stretch feels like a ton of stretch. And the nervous system interprets that normal stimuli as pain. And so we know that in IBS, and the core sort of diagnostic feature of irritable bowel syndrome isn't just having a bit of diarrhea, isn't just having a bit of gas and bloating. It is the sensation of pain on a regular basis. And so we know there's like a very significant gut-brain connection. And we know that when stress, whatever's going on in what we call our first brain impacts our second brain, because stress can alter the nervous system response and our sensations of pain in IBS.
Can you explain what IBS is? Because there's IBD, there's Crohn's. So explain IBS and then maybe talk a little bit about why high fiber foods need to be introduced slowly to prevent gastric distress.
IBD is inflammatory bowel diseases. And this is the umbrella term for both Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Two diseases that are related but different in their presentation and potentially different in their pathophysiology, from really small ways, like someone with ulcerative colitis tends to have the inflammation at a more surface level in the gut, but also further down the gut, like closer to the end zone. Whereas someone with Crohn's disease can see that inflammatory destruction throughout the entire length of the digestive tract, and it tends to go deeper in those tissues. So those are, nothing in the gut is really well understood, but, the inflammatory bowel diseases have a pretty distinct pathophysiology and are understood a little bit better. Irritable bowel syndrome is not a disease in that we see these underlying causes and it has this specific presentation. Irritable bowel syndrome is considered a disorder of gut-brain communication. And so if you look at the gut, generally, it looks like pretty normal under a scope, whereas someone with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, you can see the inflammatory damage. It takes that sort of like lush, velvety carpet of absorptive surface and just like annihilates it. IBS doesn't do that. So what we see are, many different things, from a change in the function. We've also called IBS a functional condition. So the function is off, whether or not you have constipation or diarrhea, you have a lot of bloating and distension, you have the feeling of excess gas or perhaps slow motility, but definitely pain. Pain is really key to that presentation. And so there's a lot more that we are learning about IBS, how that many of the things we call IBS might not actually be IBS, they might be something else. A great example is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Someone, if they go to the GP might be like, okay, well, it's not Crohn's, it's not celiac disease, you've got all these symptoms, you got IBS, and leave the investigation there. Whereas some people have access to a little bit more hardy, disease investigation, and they'll actually go through, well, like, let's do some breath tests, for example. Let's see, if we use a bile acid sequestrant, because bile acid diarrhea can masquerade as IBS. And so it's really challenging as a dietitian, particularly when people don't have access to very thorough gastroenterological care, because we're treating something like IBS. But, and in fact, all the things that we would typically do, such as a low FODMAP diet, maybe we try a probiotic, maybe we do gut-directed hypnotherapy, and none of that works. And so we're like, why isn't this working? And it's potentially because it is something else. It's not classic IBS.
So you're mentioning probiotics. I have taken them before. A lot of times I'll start taking them if I'm going to leave the country. But I don't take them on a regular basis. I think Alexandra does.
Just started taking Akkermansia because of a guest that we had, Dr. Lee, who, and in his books, he recommends it. But, Dotsie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious, mom has tried those as well. I don't know. I know we know that they're live bugs, like live bacteria. So I'm always getting them in the refrigerated section because it doesn't make sense that they're still alive and going to work on the shelf. That doesn't make any sense to me. It might be the case, but it just doesn't make sense. So how do you help patients? Do you help patients with probiotics? When is a good time to use them, or not at all? Or do you just try to continue to get it from fiber-rich foods, your probiotics?
Probiotics are so deeply controversial in the medical community, and with good reason. So in my clinical history, I have used probiotics with my clients, some with incredible success. And what we didn't talk about in, particularly in IBS, but honestly in Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, even in celiac disease, there is often a microbiome component. So there's a lot of controversy about what is the best way to support the microbiome. Some practitioners would say probiotics, because if you have a whole bunch of gnarly bugs sitting in your gut, it's thought that one of the fastest ways to influence that community of bacteria is by putting in more of the good ones. The challenge with that is that there are thousands of probiotics on the market.
Yeah.
And so very few of them have any randomized controlled trials in humans to suggest that they work. And so we get into this really interesting place that in the scientific literature, we have all of decades of research to suggest that probiotics could be very beneficial in so many different conditions. But then we have a marketplace that's totally unregulated. There are thousands of probiotics making all sorts of claims, and so few of them have the actual human data to suggest they work. There's a great tool for anyone who's curious about probiotics, and it's called the Probiotic Chart in Canada, or the US Probiotic Guide in the United States. It's just usprobioticguide.com. And I recommend this for dietitians and practitioners who are working with their clients, but even just, it's a not very pretty website, but it's functional. It does the job. So if you go to there and you can see, I was scrolling through TikTok and I saw this probiotic. I wonder if they have any research, because the influencer sure made it sound good. You can go to this website and you can look up every single brand of probiotic on the market that has research. And so what you're looking is for level 1 research, which means at the very least, one properly designed randomized control trial in humans that suggests that it works. So that if we're going to do probiotics at all, that's really, really critical. The other challenge we run into with probiotics is that it can be a little bit like patching up a leaky boat with bubblegum. So if you are super stressed out And because of that, and you are working a ton, you don't have a lot of time to cook. And so you're just grabbing like whatever coffee shop or cafe thing going. You're not eating a lot of fiber. You're not sleeping well. All of these factors are contributing to the health of your gut microbiome. And yet you're trying to make it better by just putting in a few more good bugs. Like as soon as you take that probiotic away again, nothing. So, ideally, we would want to foster the right environment that a healthy microbiome wants to live in. But that, of course, is much more difficult than just taking a pill. So, we have to be like, okay, so what, like be really honest with ourselves. What in my life, this 4 hours of sleep a night probably isn't doing me any favors. Like, how can I shut my phone off sooner? How can I dim the lights after 9 p.m.? Maybe I take a bath. Maybe I do a chamomile tea. Like, what can I do to foster better sleep, even if that's going to your doc to get some support? Then you're like, okay, so the diet, we could do a little better. There's like pretty much no fiber. Maybe I'm not drinking much water. Maybe the last time I had a vegetable was Tuesday. Let's be real about like,
it's Tuesday right now. We're good.
Okay. Today we are good. This is a good day. But like tomorrow, then we're going to be like, that was in the past. Yeah. So, what can you add? And I think one of the biggest things that like I really rail against online is that most digestive health guidance on the internet is one of restriction and removal. Gluten causes inflammation. Don't eat that. Soy causes inflammation. Don't eat that. Like X causes leaky gut. Make sure you don't eat that. Well, you don't have much left to build a healthy gut microbiome on. The real juice of like gut health is focusing on what to add. And you don't have to do it. This is the beautiful thing is that you don't have to change overnight. You're like, what can I do this week? I can buy a bag of apples and I can eat a single apple every day. There's 4 grams of fiber. I wasn't getting any before. So, like make it that simple, make it that permanent, because every single day you're working towards better gut health.
Yeah. Can I just clarify one thing I think is important for people to realize, and you touch on it, is because the market is unregulated for supplements, probiotics, you can get probiotics that have virtually nothing in them that they say. So really get a good brand. Is that,
and
there's
do
only
they
a
need
couple
to be
brands,
refrigerated?
Yeah.
Like, is that one of the aspects?
Now they don't. So if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have said a good probiotic is always found in the refrigerator because they're going to die off at room temperature.
Right.
Now the technology is constantly improving. And so there are clinical strength, evidence-backed probiotics that are stable at room temperatures. And a big important piece of that is to look at for the expiry date, but also look at when they guarantee the potency until. There are a lot of even like quote unquote evidence-based probiotics where they will say, we're evidence-based, we do X, Y, and Z. Maybe we like ease constipation, or maybe we reduce gas and bloating. And they'll be like, we're an evidence-based probiotic. And then they'll say, oh, maybe we are 10 billion, CFUs, so colony forming units. But then if you actually like turn their packaging around or you start snooping around on their website, you'll notice that the 10 billion CFU is guaranteed at time of manufacture, not at time of expiry date. And so that means that you're getting 10 billion off the line, but 2 years later, it's been sitting on the shelf and like how many bacteria are still left in there. And that's really important. That happens a lot. There's a lot of like shady little baits and switches. So use the probiotic. This is why, like, I love it. It's a third party. It's like done by a clinical pharmacist out of Canada. So it's a really, really solid resource to use that probiotic guide because they are doing those sorts of checks. If their data says 100 billion is what's efficacious and they sell at 1 billion, they're going to note that there's a problem there.
So it's the brand that they are evaluating, not the actual probiotic for your symptom.
They're doing both. So because they have the brand and then they do all the indications. So they will have constipation, diarrhea, IBS, even like women's health or vaginal health, for example. And then they'll put like, oh, they have level 1 for this, They have level 2 for this. They have none for this, none for this, none for this. So it's really nice and specific because for a probiotic to work, and even the best, most evidence-based probiotic can't work for everyone. Genetically, our gut microbiomes are so vastly different. But if you have even just a glimmer of hope that it's going to work, you want the thing for you. If you have IBS, you want a probiotic with data for IBS.
Have you ever felt trapped in a cycle of stress and sleepless nights? I know I have. But since I've added Magnesium Breakthrough to my nightly routine, no joke, I've been able to quiet my mind, fall asleep fast, and stay asleep longer. And what sets this supplement apart is that while other magnesium supplements, and certainly all the other ones I've tried, and I've been taking magnesium for years, while all the other ones only give you 1 to 2 forms of magnesium, Magnesium Breakthrough contains all 7 forms. So, I'd never even heard of this. So it will not only help you fall asleep, but it will keep you regular and focus your mind, plus the many, many other things that magnesium does, which you've probably heard me talk about on this podcast, because as I said before, I've been taking magnesium for years and it's really, really helped me. But I love this magnesium because it contains all 7 forms of the supplement, and it's vegan, gluten-free, and soy-free. And also super important to me because, as we know, supplements aren't regulated. They don't contain always what they say they contain, but Magnesium Breakthrough has received a good manufacturing practice certification through third-party inspections, so you can trust by optimizers. So get this all-natural, full-spectrum magnesium supplement by going to buyoptimizers.com/switch4good and use promo code switch4good during checkout to save 10%. One of the reasons I imagine you recommend that people feed their microbiome not with probiotics, but with fiber, which is a prebiotic, is that right? Which is food for the microbiome, and you pretty much guarantee that they will like it and it will work.
That's exactly it. So, you got to think about it as hosting guests for a dinner party. When you have vegans coming to a dinner party, you don't serve chicken. So if you want the right kind of bacteria to take up, a home in your gut, good bugs like plants. And so the idea is by slowly building up this high fiber, high fermentable carbohydrate, whole plant food diet, the more you are fostering a community that will welcome in those plant loving bugs. And that's what you want to do over time to help stabilize your gut microbiome.
That is so helpful. One of the issues that we didn't speak about much with IBS, it seems like it can go one way or the other, meaning one side is, constant diarrhea and the other side is constipation. And so many people have constipation, it seems like these days. And I say these days, I don't know if they had constipation 100 years ago. I haven't looked at that research, but it's really, really common in elderly people. Is that because they're not able to move as much? What's going on? And what do you recommend to listeners who are suffering?
Constipation is a huge issue. It is one of the most common reasons why people will seek out GI care. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that, but there are 3 very basic, fundamental sort of drivers of constipation. The first is movement. To move your gut, you got to move. The second is water. You need to drink adequate water to help things move. And the third is dietary fiber. And so the reason why we see this more as we get older, although it affects every age level, including children, is that as we get older, our motility, so the rate at which our digestive tract moves, because as soon as we swallow, we give up conscious control of the movement of foodstuffs through our digestive tract. That is our nervous system. So that is without our conscious control, our nervous system is slowly moving everything through. And as we get older, that starts to slow down, which is also why we get more reflux as we get older. But it is definitely a driver in constipation. We see it in pregnancy as well. Hormones in pregnancy can slow down the digestive tract. In addition to having this, giant baby sort of booting on your colon, hormones can really slow things down. So that's one reason why it's more common as we get older. The other reason is that our appetites, particularly over the age of 60, our appetites tend to dwindle. I'm over 40 and I notice now, like even just over 40, like my eyes are bigger than my plate most of the time, so our appetites tend to dwindle, which means we might be eating a little bit less, which probably means we're eating less fiber. So then you have less fiber helping to sort of give weight to the contents of your gut and move it along. And then, yes, it can go hand in hand with dehydration and water, but then also less movement. We sort of like go out a little less, walk a little less, stay home a little more. And all of those factors can contribute to slow motility and potentially constipation.
I take magnesium for many reasons, and one of them is that it keeps me completely regular without a doubt. And so I'm wondering how you feel about magnesium as a supplement to help, because I think it has not only does it help with that, but apparently it helps with a lot of other systems in our body.
I love magnesium for a couple of different reasons. So old-fashioned milk of magnesia, which we used to take as a laxative, is magnesium. It's milk of magnesia. So magnesium works as an osmotic laxative to help draw water into the bowel and encourage movement. But there are different forms of magnesium that have slightly different effects. If you're looking for more of a bowel support from magnesium, you want to look for more of a magnesium citrate, for example. And then you have to find the right dose. And I will say this with magnesium, just because it's a mineral doesn't mean it can't interact with medications or health conditions. So if you're going to take more than just a little bit of magnesium, you really need to talk to your doc or your pharmacist. But magnesium citrate can really help keep you regular. I love magnesium for nervous system and sleep support. And I personally take a form of magnesium called magnesium glycinate, or sometimes you see it as bisglycinate. This is less for the bowel because it tends to be better absorbed into the system. So, the citrate is going to help stay in the bowel and do what you want it to do there, but the glycinate is going to be better absorbed to have an impact on nervous system function. And I take that with L-theanine in the evening just to help me exhale, wind down so that I can get a better sleep. I spent over a decade sleeping terribly. And then that combination is really, really, it doesn't help everyone, but I've been using it with clients for a long time. And I would say that it helps at least 2/3 of people.
Wow, that's good. That's really. Yeah. Now you wrote a blog where I think it was a blog that I read of yours, top 5 things that people should do if they're diagnosed with IBS. I don't mean to go back to it, but it doesn't have to do with food. You talk about adaptogens and cutting back on caffeine, meal spacing. Could you talk about that a little bit before we move on?
Yeah. Again, wanting to just take the pressure off of nutrition. And just because I am stubborn and rebellious when all of the messaging is about what not to eat or what to eat, I like to be like, okay, let's just hold up a little bit. So, again, it is because our presentation of IBS is always going to be individual, and there are going to be individual triggers and drivers for us. For myself specifically, I know that stress and my nervous system has a huge role to play. And so what I found is as I was playing with my own nutrition, I noticed that the more that I could calm myself down, the better results that I had. And so if this sort of speaks to someone, if they're like, oh yeah, I tried low FODMAP and it didn't work, or I tried, probiotics and it didn't work, it could be nervous system based. And so you have a lot of different options there. One that's newer since I wrote that blog post is gut-directed hypnotherapy. This sounds so woo-woo, like it's like, what's going to happen? Like, are you going to just coat me in crystals, which is beautiful and might help too. But actually, gut-directed hypnotherapy is an evidence-based tool. So you do hypnotherapy where the messaging is very much about digestive function. And there are some clinical trials to show that it can work as well as the low FODMAP diet for irritable bowel symptoms, which is really remarkable and really speaks to that gut-brain connection. The other thing that I found super helpful for myself, especially because I tend to be like a little tightly wound, a little anxious, shall we say, ashwagandha was something that really became a part of my own self-care because ashwagandha is an adaptogen, and all the adaptogens are traditional medicine. So this one hails from Ayurvedic medicine, and they all have different sort of utility and effects on the body. But adaptogens as a category are thought to help the body come back into homeostasis or come back into balance in times of stress. And so ashwagandha is supposed to do this. We do actually have we have lots of lab data, and then we do have some human clinical trials to support ashwagandha in terms of protecting the body against the effects of stress, protecting the immune system against the effects of stress. But it also tends to be very grounding and calming in its feeling in the body, whereas other adaptogens such as rhodiola are slightly stimulating. If you already feel very stimulated, that's not the thing for you. So again, really important that you talk to a practitioner if you're curious about this kind of thing, to make sure that you're getting the right adaptogen for you, but also one that's not going to like mess with your medications or anything else.
You also talked about meal spacing, and I hadn't heard about that. So
yeah, most of us have heard of a form of meal spacing when it's called intermittent fasting, which I'm not necessarily a big fan of, particularly for women of reproductive age. But this is like a mini version, like a light, intermittent fasting light. Sometimes with my clients, depending on, again, how their symptoms present. A great example being, in the morning, you wake up, and as opposed to feeling like pretty light because, your meal's been maybe 10, 11 hours, past, and you've been like laying down, hopefully not in restrictive pajamas. Like generally you should wake up feeling like your gut's like pretty good. But for a lot of people with irritable bowel syndrome, mornings are the worst, and you can be the most bloated and the most distended in the morning. And, oftentimes when that happens, I will look at what happens the evening before. And lots of us have the habit of after dinner snacking, which if you're hungry and if it doesn't hurt your gut, is totally fine. Eat when you're hungry. But for people with these kind of symptoms, we might say, I notice like the snacking is creeping into like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 9:30. Let's see if meal spacing will just help give your body a bit of a break and lessen this morning distension. And so I might suggest 12 hours overnight. Like, let's just give our body a 12-hour window. And one of the things I'm hoping is going to happen in that window is that our guts are like, they're so cool. If you're super nerdy like me, guts are the coolest thing ever. And, as I mentioned, after we swallow, we sort of give up conscious control of that movement, for better or for worse, our body does its thing. One of the things that it's designed to do is we go through the fed state. So we put food in our body. It does all the digestive and absorptive things. And then when it senses that's done, and when the gut is largely empty, there's always going to be a bit of extras, like fiber, for example, that didn't get digested. But when the body senses it's out of the fed state, it turns on something called the migrating motor complex, which is just this sensation, this nervous system signal that creates a strong cleansing wave throughout the body, starting at the stomach. And it's meant to move through any undigestive stuff, but it also moves through any bacteria as well. And so this is really important to get these MMC, specifically these third wave MMC, migrating motor complex, just to push things through. This is really good for motility, particularly for people with a lot of gas, bloating, distension, and who lean towards constipation. So 12 hours overnight might help. And then sometimes for people who are really dealing with gas, bloating throughout the day, or for clients with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, that's when I might suggest more of a spacing between the meals during the day. And the reason for that is that those third wave MMCs, they need time. So we don't know for any one person, but they're only going to initiate after the fed state is done. Maybe that's 45 minutes after you ate. Maybe that's 2 hours after you eat. So if you're one of those people who's like nibbling on something every 90 minutes, you might not be activating those waves, which again, if your gut feels amazing, you do you. But if you're dealing with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, we try and craft a meal that's balanced enough and filling enough that people can mostly go maybe 4 hours, maybe a little longer, just in between meals. So they can go through fed and then they can get into fasted. And then they just have that nice little wave to like move everything along so that their body is ready for the next meal.
I feel like we should go to the cookbook so we can put all of this into action. I mean, wow. Yeah, this is going to be so helpful. Everything you've just gone over. It's totally schooled us. I was like, oh, I wanted to start taking notes. And I was like, no, I can just re-listen. It's hard to take it all in. But you have two other cookbooks. Like your one now is Plant Magic, but you have the other one's Good for Your Gut and Eat More Plants. So this one must be different in some way.
It is, Eat More Plants and Good for Your Gut. I love them so much. And they really speak to my philosophy as a dietitian, where I want you to understand why I'm giving you the advice that I am. I want you to understand how your body works. I want you to understand what the nutrients do or how food impacts your system. So both of those books have about 100 pages up front, teaching you the nutrition behind, here's why this food is delicious, but also good for you. So Eat More Plants was more about plant-based diets in general, but also a little bit on chronic inflammation. And then Good for Your Gut was this like everything from why do we get gassy to like what's diarrhea, what's constipation, how do I know if this is just like normal or if I should go see a doc? And then it launches into the recipes, because one of the things that I learned, if you had asked me 15 years ago when I became a dietitian, I would not say that I would be like writing cookbooks right now. Like it never would have crossed my mind. I was like, I don't know.
Really?
I don't cook with a recipe. I just like put things in and like, but I realized very, very quickly as I opened my private practice all that time ago was that we would do the nutrition talk and the people would say, but like, I need recipes. Like you've said all these good things. Like I want to eat more legumes. I want to eat more fiber. I want to try and eat less saturated fat, but I then don't know how to put that on a plate so that I can actually follow your advice. And so very quickly I was like, oh, I get this. Okay. I was missing a key component, which is like, here's what you make for dinner on a Friday night to ensure you get the fiber and that it is lower in saturated fat and that your blood sugars are balanced, for example. And so that was really the philosophy of those books. And Plant Magic is, it depends on the day that you talk to me. My biggest reason for wanting to create Plant Magic was that I wanted to show people that eating well is abundant. It is a celebration. Plant foods are so glorious and joyous and flavorful that it's not about, oh, well, I must, like eat sad food in order to quote unquote be healthy. That like being healthy is freaking delicious.
And not restrictive.
Not restrictive. Yeah. Like us plant people eat all the things that everybody else does, but they're made with plants instead of being made with animal products. And so the recipes in this book really drive flavor and joy home. Everything is super flavorful. It's really fun. They're foods that you crave, because I wanted to show people that like, yes, you can actually crave vegetables. You can actually crave whole grains. So that was really the driving force behind that book. But I also think that when I conceived of this book, it was because I was feeling very much at odds with how nutrition was impacting people. Definitely on the internet. I spend so much time on blogs and on Instagram and on TikTok, and just so much of the messaging is fearful and negative and restrictive. And part of me just like wanted to throw it all away, And so this book is really my antidote to that. Like maybe we can just give a little less airtime to the minutia of nutrition. Maybe we can just unfollow a bunch of accounts and just trust our body that when we choose more whole plant foods, we're going to be okay. And so there isn't a big nutrition section in this one. It is really about the ways that we build flavor the ways that we craft meals that are super fun, even for the plant skeptics among us, and just about like reconnecting to joy and like a healthy, positive relationship to food.
Can you give us some ideas of like maybe a recipe for breakfast, lunch, dinner?
Yeah. So chocolate chip spelt pancakes. I love whole grains. Like I don't think of whole grains as being like, oh, like sometimes we eat the quote unquote healthy grains, like whole grains are my staple. And so there's a really delicious like chocolate chip spelt pancake recipe in there, which is so much fun. My kids like it's nice having children, also like horrible for my ego, but like they, they will tell me if they don't like something. And so I was like, I need to make a pancake that even my 8-year-old will love. And I did it. So that's fantastic.
Tell me why you use spelt though. I want to go a little deeper into this. There's so many different flours.
Yeah.
And so what is, I don't even know spelt. I've never seen a spelt plant. I only see it in the health food stores. So what does spelt give your pancakes that whole wheat flour wouldn't have?
Yeah. So, spelt is a type of whole wheat, but it's a more ancient grain. And here we don't have a lot of data to say that spelt is, that much more nutrient dense or has many more health benefits than sort of like standard everyday 100% whole wheat flour. But where I do sort of lean into things like spelt and kamut and millet, for example, is that we want to drive a variety, going back and like, honestly, if I had a nickel for every time someone on a podcast mentioned the American Gut Project, but we know because of that data that we want to introduce a variety of foods. And so maybe one week you're cooking everything with whole wheat flour. And then when that bag is out, maybe we switch to spelt. Then when that bag is out, maybe we say, hey, we haven't done almond meal in a while. Like, let's cook with almond flour. Like, let's get that flour into our bodies. So it really is more about the variety than anything else. But spelt and whole wheat and emmer, all of those are so rich in fibers, really rich in fermentable carbohydrates like arabinoxylans that do drive the growth of beneficial bacteria in the body, tons of minerals like iron. And people don't even think about the protein too. Like wheat and the ancient wheats are really, really, if we can call them that, they're superfoods and they do not get the respect they deserve.
Great. Well, okay. So I have my breakfast for tomorrow set up. What is a lunch that you recommend?
One of my favorites, just because it's like an everyday food elevated, are the West Coast hippie sandwiches. So, I am of a certain generation where I remember at the mall, we had places like the Sandwich Tree, and it was like fancy to go to the Sandwich Tree and maybe get like avocado or sprouts on this like nice sandwich, which is so much nicer than the basic thing that you would make at home. And so I sort of wanted to do that. And this sandwich absolutely has sprouts and cucumber and avocado, and then a cashew cheese. So like a homemade cashew cheese. So it's all of the things. It's creamy and it's like vegetal, like it's got that sort of herbal flavor on some sprouted grain bread or some sourdough. So, so good.
Or sprouted whole grain sourdough is what they're making at the farmer's market here in Mexico. We're just totally addicted to it. It's like all the favorites put together. What about with a lot of the baking? You'll use coconut oil in some of those recipes. How talk to us about coconut oil and saturated fat because people are interested.
Yeah, I feel like it'd be so interesting to look back at the book, like which contained which. I use a lot of extra virgin olive oil in my baking, which a lot of people shy away from because it's so flavorful. But when I'm doing whole grain baking and because I'm focused on flavor, the recipes are so flavorful that you don't notice the extra virgin olive oil at all. And that's absolutely my go-to for every day. But there are some recipes where coconut oil, the melting texture of it, the very neutral flavor of it just works so much better. And I would say that, particularly for those of us who are fully vegan or fully plant-based, we have a little bit of wiggle room in our saturated fat budget versus people who consume meat and dairy every single day because we want to minimize saturated fat in our lives. And coconut oil does contain a lot of saturated fat, and it does actually have an impact on our blood cholesterol levels. So it's not what I would use 3 meals a day. Absolutely. But absolutely, we're baking ourselves a little something. You can use a little coconut oil.
Thank you for that permission. I don't shy away. Alexandra does though. So you really gave her permission.
I don't like coconut. I even wonder. So I put coconut oil sometimes on my skin as a moisturizer, and I know that my skin is a, big absorbent. And I wonder, just out of the blue here, am I raising my saturated fat levels by putting coconut oil on my skin?
That is such an, I feel like I'm going to be very nerdy and start diving into that as soon as we get off this call. I would say my best educated guess would be there's no way the dosage would at all, like those lipids, I would assume get incorporated into the lipid layer of your own skin, if anything, as opposed to like getting into the bloodstream. They're pretty big molecules and things need to be really, really small to sort of like, sneak past the barrier of our skin. So yeah, I would say, who knows, we might have to put out an addendum, Desiree went on the internet and realized.
Look it up. Right.
Absolutely wrong.
That's what I think about. Because coconut oil, I definitely try and stay away from it. But I did notice that it was in at least a couple of your dessert recipes, which looked delicious. Thank you for explaining that. Do you have any cooking tips and tricks in your book or in your own, just that you could share with us?
Yeah. So first things first, there are no awards for heroism in cooking. If you need to buy, pre-chopped cabbage so that you actually get that cabbage into your body, if you don't have the time to cook beans from scratch, it's okay to buy canned. I buy no salt added canned all the time. So one thing is take the hacks, take the, shortcuts whenever you need, because they're going to help you put a meal on the table at home as opposed to you calling for takeout. So first things first, like you don't have to be a hero. Second thing is focus on flavor, particularly for those of us in North America who come from like a European background. Many of our culinary traditions are very bland. Like my husband is half Norwegian and, bless them. Like it's like salt, like that. That is like as far as they go on a lot of their foodstuffs. It's salt. So, many of us are used to doing tiny little pinches of things, like a tiny pinch of cumin or maybe a tiny pinch of thyme. You want to measure your herbs and spices in cooking with scoops, not pinches. So that's really going to help, particularly if we're trying not to eat too much salt. You really want to lean into those herbs and spices. And then for me, because I cook for an omnivorous household, they're omnivores who eat vegan because of me and me alone. I really try to lean into certain flavor enhancers that I've learned over the years that replace, particularly for those people who are like, I would love, like, I don't want to contribute to industrial animal agriculture. I would love to go plant-based, but I've had a hard time finding plant foods that just taste delicious to me. And one of the reasons why that is that there is a ton of umami in animal foods. Like when we are throwing Parmesan on things, when we are adding bacon to Brussels sprouts, it's because there's a fat there, but also there's a lot of umami flavor that we can replace in plant-based cooking. One of my go-to hacks, like was life-changing in my cooking, is Better Than Bouillon. I have never been sponsored by them whatsoever. I wish, but like this is this incredible bouillon concentrate. It's also from an ecological perspective. You're buying one little jar as opposed to like dozens of Tetra packs of broth. It's far more flavorful and umami rich than using a standard vegetable broth. So that's something that I use for all of my soups that really lend this sort of like juicy umami flavor to them. The other things that I use up nutritional yeast all the time. I could buy it by the kilo and I would still go through it. So nutritional yeast, again, it's another layer of it. It's not quite cheesy. We say that it's cheesy. It's not quite cheesy, but it does have that sort of cheesy, fermenty umami that I sprinkle on like Parmesan sometimes at the end of a meal. Like if I'm doing a pasta or a Caesar salad and I like a little sprinkle of nutritional yeast, I use it heavily in sauces as well. And then I think the ones that will surprise people, because particularly when I was learning to cook, I sort of poo-pooed them as being, I don't know, maybe like old fashioned. And it's garlic and onion powder.
Mhm.
I was like, well, I'll use fresh onion and fresh garlic. And I absolutely use those things. But even in my recipes where I've used a whole onion and a few cloves of garlic and onion powder add a depth and richness of flavor that are so, so satisfying and will satisfy even the most skeptical eater at your table.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
they really do add a layer of richness to like pretty much anything.
I'm like a big fan of garlic powder on top of my salads now. And you have to be really careful that it's garlic powder, not garlic salt, because that is so salty if you do
Yeah.
too much garlic. But I am going to admit, if there's any listeners that are like me, I did not know what umami even is. And it is translated, I thought this was cool, to the essence of deliciousness in Japanese.
Yeah.
But it's one of the 5 key taste profiles. I knew about sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. Didn't know the 5th one. So there you go for anybody that's like, what are you talking about? So it's like, what is that? It's like that meaty, savory that deepens the flavor of things, right? Like that's what you're saying that meat eaters are just like looking for when they're going through the plant world and trying to,
And there are several compounds and components. Glutamate is the most famous of them, but there are several different compounds and components in food, from garlic, for example, to mushrooms, that when you're layering these things on, it creates a really round, rich flavor that makes things taste so it is the essence of deliciousness.
Is it kind of fatty too? Like it's not that it has fat in it, but it satiates that part that you're wanting, like that fatty, because none of the other ones do.
It does. And I think also, that speaks to when we cook, and what people will notice in Plant Magic is that I am not afraid of a little fat. I am not afraid of a little salt. And particularly around fat, one of the reasons why it is so important is because fat carries flavor. So when we're working and putting all of these flavorful components in food, many flavor molecules are fat soluble. So the presence of fat in food is going to help us experience that flavor far more. In addition, many nutrients and particularly phytochemicals are also fat soluble. So when we're eating all of these incredible nutrient dense foods, having some fat at that meal is going to help us absorb them all much better so that we are better nourished.
Wow. I learned so much. Thank you very, very much for all your wonderful expertise, not only on cooking, but how we can be healthier. And your book is so beautiful, and the recipes really look delicious. Dotsie and I had a chance to look through some of them. Plant Magic, it's out now. And Desiree, thank you so much for coming back on the show.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy talking with you both.
Yeah. Thank you. Awesome.